Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Esmeralda Rodriguez Eguia, Director of Programs at ALPFA National. Thank you for joining Redefining Identity Beyond Service. The conversation is especially meaningful as it takes place during Veterans Month, a time to honor and celebrate the service and contributions of those who have worn the uniform and continue to shape our communities in important ways. Our session is dedicated to exploring the journeys of Latina women veterans as they navigate the transition from military service to civilian life, redefining their identities and the strategies that have empowered these women to embrace their next chapters. We're honored to have two incredible panelists today. Lisa Carrington Firming, a Bronze Star decorated combat veteran of the U.S. Air Force. She's an award-winning author and poet whose writings include Latina Warrior and Stories from the Front, Pain, Betrayal, Resilience on the MST Battlefield. She is also the founder and CEO of Carrington Firming LLC, which provides writing and consulting services in leadership, veteran culture, transitions, military sexual trauma, and diversity and inclusion. We're also joined by Denise Montoya, a bilingual community leader and Air Force veteran with a passion for advocating for veterans and their families across the Chicagoland area through her work at the Chicago VA Medical Center, the Veterans and Family Advisory Council at Jesse Brown VA, and the VA Women's Improvement Network, where she advocates for the unique needs of women veterans. Thank y'all for being here as we shine a light on the unique journeys of women veterans. To start, I'd like to invite our panelists to share more about themselves, their military backgrounds, what inspired them to serve, and what brought them to this conversation today. Denise, why don't you kick it off?
Hi, yes, thank you. Hello, everyone, virtually. As Dr. Esmeralda mentioned, my name is Denise Montoya. I'm an Air Force veteran. I joined in 2008 and separated in 2012. Born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. The only time I left this city was when I was actually in the military. I joined the military actually initially because my older brother was in the Marines and was serving while I was in high school. And between at that time, we were sending letters here and there, pictures, and I was just so excited to see him being out on his own. He was traveling to different places like Japan and Puerto Rico. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it sounds amazing. Like, I want to do that. So that's what initially had inspired me to wanting to join the military, being able to have the opportunity, to go out on my own, to travel, to serve my country. And yeah, that is overall what had inspired me. And again, I decided to do a few years of college before joining officially to the Air Force. And that wasn't my first pick. I actually was looking into going into the Marines like my brother, but I had some great advice and I ended up looking at all the branches before making my final choice in joining the Air Force. I did do one hiccup, I would say, is I ended up going open general. At the time, I was like 21, so I was starting to be impatient. I didn't want to wait to be able to join and serve. I felt like I waited for so long, and I went in open general. And what that means when you go into the military is that the Air Force at that time chose the job for me, so I didn't choose what I wanted to go into. And I ended up being security forces, which is military police. Some of my roles there when I was doing that was like an installation controller, dispatcher, security forces, like securing the flight lines, and then law enforcement as well. So I did that all overseas. My first base was in Lagos Field, Azores, and my second base was Aviato, Italy. After that experience, it was for 4 years, I decided to separate. Given since that wasn't my choice to go into that particular job, or MOS, they would say, I was like, okay, it's time to move on from the Air Force. And so I did. So I ended up separating in 2012, decompressed for about like a year or so. At that time, my brother was actually already a part of ALPFA. So he introduced me to ALPFA back in 2012, which was really nice. I ended up going to a convention then. And it was beautiful. I loved it. And I've been with Alpha ever since with the networking and the opportunities that to be a part of it. Such a wonderful community. And while I was kind of going through that path, I also started to wanting to get back into doing something like finding my purpose again in life. After I separated, I didn't have school or a job lined up, so I actually ended up volunteering at Jesse Brown VA. Um, Started doing that for quite a bit, but I think I can go into more about that. I think I was going to the other question, but overall, I'm really happy to be a part of this conversation today, and I think it's really important. It's taken me a while. It's been 12 years now since I've been out. So I know redefining your identity, it has been a journey for me, and it continues to be a journey for me. But again, having such a strong community and have a great support has helped me be able to do um, so many different things that I'm a part of right now. So also excited to share. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Denise. Lisa, would you like to share more about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Esmeralda, for the opportunity to be here today. Soy Tejana. I'm from South Texas, from the Valley, the RGV. So people from Texas know exactly where I'm talking about, right? Very southern tip of Texas. I'm a first generation to go to college, and my father served as well. And I think that was one of the main drivers for me to come in the service, was his service and his I had a lot of uncles who served as well. A lot of the men in my family served. So I was the first woman to come in. And also my dad was a disabled veteran. So I actually went to college under the Chapter 35 of the VA benefits, using my father's benefit. So I didn't have a choice. I had to go to college and become the first one in the family to graduate. So so I did that. And then I realized that my father talked to me about joining the military. He said that's always an opportunity for me. I really wanted to be a leader. And I got a degree. I was pretty young. Again, first gen, but I finished college in 3 years with honors. After being told I probably shouldn't go to college by my high school counselor. So there's a first lesson for you. Don't ever listen to anybody else. You create your own destiny, right? You pave your own path forward. So I did. I graduated. I was 20 years old. With a college degree, thought I was all that, because I graduated honors, right? Boy, I had a rude awakening. I went to job interviews and was given opportunities, but I didn't want them because I wanted to be in a leadership role. And I was very naive. I did not understand that in most career fields, you do not start at the top or even middle management. Mm-hmm. So I talked to my father. I said, well, I really want to be a leader. And he's like, well, you can go in as an officer. You'll be the first one in the family to be an officer. So I did that. I decided to go ahead and do that. And, 30 years later, I retired from the military. I had no idea I was going to stay in that long. I wanted, again, to pay back the country a little bit for my father's service and then for my education. But I kept getting promoted. And as I looked around the room, I was the only one that looked like me. There were very few women back then. I came in 1980 and got out in 2010. So, the journey was long. It was arduous. It was full of adversity, but it was also full of great opportunity and challenges. I was able to do a command tour and then a staff tour. And I've worked at the Pentagon. I've worked in Joint Commands. I've worked the highest levels for creating policy for 370,000 airmen in the Air Force. So I've had great opportunities, great leadership opportunities. I also had a combat tour in the Sunni Triangle in Iraq, where I was a commander there. My specialty in the Air Force is expeditionary mission combat support, which basically is creating bear bases. Had great training to do that. So I was honored to be able to do that and serve my country in that capacity. So I retired, like I said, after 30 years. I was approached by 2 organizations right before I retired, saying, we really want to hire you for your leadership. So leadership became my entry to my second career. I'm on my 3rd career right now. We can talk about that a little bit later, but second career was higher education. And unlike Denise, I did not take any time off. So I barely had, I think, 3.5 weeks off, almost 4. And that was not enough time to decompress from 30 years in the service, right? So we can talk about that when we talk about some of the transition difficulties. I definitely should have taken more time to decompress, but the opportunities were knocking on my door, and I felt like I needed to take advantage of them. Again, I had two opportunities. I selected higher education to work at an HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution, the University of Texas in San Antonio. For me, that was a perfect job match. I could help people who look just like me and be a role model and a mentor and create programming for them, unlike maybe some of the experiences I had had coming up. So I think I'll leave it at that and just tell you that I'm happy to be here and happy to tell you more about my journey as we go through this session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing that background, and thank you all for your service as well. So just I feel deeply connected to both of your geographic stories. I'm originally from Texas, puro RGV 956 from the same area, and I'm currently located in the Chicagoland area. So while I do not have military background myself, there are intersections in our experiences that I'm seeing across our histories. So let's go into that difficulty in that transition, right? One of you had a break, one of you did not. But what did you find was the most challenging part of that transition from military service to civilian life?
I can go. Yeah, I was like, I can go first. I wasn't sure if we're going back and forth. Yeah. So yes. So I took a decompression period because it was such a go while I was in the military. It was like 4 years, and it was just 4 years straight. Even though I lived overseas the whole time, between like the culture shock of living just overseas in Europe, which I've never did in my entire life, and getting to understand their culture and their way of things, to then coming back to Chicago, a place I was born and raised, and again having that culture shock of like how things have changed within the 4 years, like without even stepping back into the US for that time. I knew I didn't want to go back to school right away. I knew I didn't want to work. I knew I just needed a break to be able to think. I remember that was my mindset at that time. I came out, I was like 26 years old. I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. I hadn't had a break in so long. Let me just take a break to like reorganize my thoughts and see what I want to do next. It was helpful. It was challenging during that transition in general. It took me about like, I would say 8 months to a year. I got out in April 2012. And then I took the rest of the year off, so to speak. I didn't really want to look into anything much, but come around like the fall period, like September, October session, where people are either getting back into business, getting back into school and what have you. I'm like, all right, well, what's the next? I started making the thoughts of like, what's the next thing for me? One big factor that made it very challenging in my transition was having chronic pain. Because of the type of MOS that I had, the type of job that I had was very difficult on my body. So I had a lot of once I didn't have to wear armor in a daily, my body started doing its own thing, like stretching out, doing whatever it needed to do, realized it didn't have to carry heavy gear. It was very, very physically painful for me during that time. So I ended up going to Jesse Brown. Trying to figure out what's going on with myself physically and how I can, better myself in that aspect. There is a pain clinic that they've done, and I believe they still do to this day at the VA, where it's a schooling once a week where they kind of introduce everybody in the hospital bit by bit of like physical therapy, occupational therapy, rec therapy, like all these other departments that would help people with chronic pain. And it's pretty much up to the veteran and their choice which route they'd want to go. So I ended up going into like physical therapy. And unsurprisingly enough, that was something that I was wanting to do initially as a career. I was thinking as I was getting out, I was like, oh, this seems like a very interesting career to get into. So while going to that, in different days, I actually ended up volunteering as well. That inspired me to volunteer, to kind of understand a little bit more about how that is, how is physical therapy? Is this something that I really want to get into? And if I really feel like I want to go back into school to do. So that is something kind of like how my transitioning started happening, really was just volunteering and getting me back into a groove of not necessarily Monday through Friday, because I made my own schedule. It's actually more Monday through Thursday, but it like is still like a 9 to 3 type of period where I would go in there every day, and that helped me rebuild my structure again. And I did that for a few months, and that slowly helped me get back into the groove. All right, let me apply back to college, finish and get my bachelor's degree, which I did. But yeah, it was that sense of purpose, navigating cultural differences at that time while managing this whole chronic pain that I had. And on top of all of that, I know I had some unflattering habits that I came back to, and my brother actually made it very clear to me. Like, one big thing was the language, was the type of language that I was using. I swore a lot, because we swore all the time in the military, especially with the MOS that I had. So it was something that I had to, change, to be honest, especially if I wanted to get into professionally and going back into school. It's just like some of these habits that I had to change and just kind of reorient myself. I was no longer in the military, so everything wasn't so like boom, boom, boom. So it was just kind of like slowly but surely. But I think overall for me, it probably took like about 8 months to a year to actually fully um transition enough to be able to move forward, just moving forward with my life in general. But given, I think, transitioning, everybody's still transitioning, veteran or not. Like, you can be in school, you can go to work, you can go back to school, you can have family, what have you. There's such a transition in every period, and when that kind of happens, um there's a lot of changes, and there's stresses, good or bad. So I think overall, in that first year when I got out, I would say it was just really my decompression period that I went through. So thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Lisa?
Okay, so we're talking about challenges that we had for transitioning, correct? Okay, I would kind of put mine in two different categories. One is what to wear. Okay, and that people laugh at that when I say it, but I'm serious. And it kind of falls into the next one, because I don't think I was prepared for the mental, psychological transition that I was going to undergo. So let me tell you about what to wear. So I was hired. I was an associate provost, right? And so that's a pretty high level. You're working for the provost, who's the chief academic officer for the university, who works directly for the president. So all the colleges that are in a university work for the deans, work for the provost, and I work for the provost. So I'm working alongside a lot of deans and people that are pretty high level in higher education. And I, of course, I'm new to higher ed, really. I never worked in higher ed before, but I was hired for my leadership. So I'm an outsider coming in. So I wanted to look the part. So I, purchased some suits and all these kind of things. Remember, I told you I had barely 4 weeks between retirement and then starting this job. So in those 4 weeks, I went and got, bought some suits and bought some shoes and that kind of stuff. And I quickly learned that, man, civilian clothes, it is hard to get used to. And accessorizing, I have no idea what that meant, right? I wore a combat uniform. I had pockets that had my wallets and that kind of stuff, and I didn't carry a purse and that kind of thing. So I see Denise is going, yeah, I get that. So it was, for me, again, I'm this kind of high level associate provost, and I'm supposed to carry myself a certain way. And I have to say, though, the job never bothered me. I was never intimidated by any job that I was going to do or I was offered. I figured, with my leadership experience in the military, peacetime and combat, I could lead anything, anywhere. And I've done that a lot. So I wasn't intimidated by working in higher education. I just wanted to know what to wear, because I didn't know what to wear. So, and I'll give you an example. I'm at Department of Labor doing a presentation for Veterans Day. I had been asked by the Department of Labor secretary to come speak. And I had just retired a few months before. It was my first real event wearing a suit, that kind of thing. So I'm walking to the podium and I catch my reflection, a glass reflection on the window. And I said, oh, who's that civilian? I did not see myself as I was presenting myself, right? And I wasn't concerned about talking about leadership. That to me was not an issue. But I just I couldn't get used to seeing myself in civilian clothes. I thought that was someone else. So when I saw this reflection, I didn't think that was me. So I definitely had a loss of identity, a loss of who I was. Imagine 30 years of wearing the same clothes, same boots, or if you're wearing the dress blues, the pumps or whatever. But I mean, I didn't have to worry about what I was going to wear, I was very comfortable in that structured environment. So I was like a fish out of water, but I hid it well. I think I'm the queen of compartmentalization. No one had any idea. It's like the ducks on the water. Underneath, I was going crazy, but they had no idea. I presented myself a certain way. The first week at work, I got blisters on every one of my toes. And I'm like, how do civilian women wear these shoes? I miss my combat boots so much, right? And so people laugh at me, but these were serious concerns for me. And then I bought the wrong clothes. I should have waited until I showed up to work and found out if they were formal or informal, casual or not, because I bought too many formal suits, and I quickly had to change that so I could fit in. I also would show up to meetings 15 minutes before the meeting started. The door was locked. I mean, I'm like, oh, did they give me the wrong room? Are they trying to set me? I'm thinking they're trying to play jokes on me like we do in the military all the time, right? So I'm like standing outside this room thinking, is this the real place? And no one shows up till on the dot, the meeting starts. They unlock the door and everybody piles in. So it took me a long time to get used to that environment, having to show up exactly on time, not early, because I was taught if you're a minute late, that's really bad. You should be an hour early if you have to be, right? So it was a whole different mindset of me learning the higher ed landscape, their vocabulary. I mean, we think we have acronyms in the military. Let me tell you, higher ed has a lot of acronyms. They would use all these acronyms and I would immediately revert back to what I thought they were in the military. One person was talking about IED and I'm thinking about improvised explosive device, right? They're talking about an Institute for Economic Development, and so this would get me all the time. My first thought was to go back to the military. So the learning curve for me was like, had to be straight up, and I did a lot of listening tours. I'd go meet with different deans and different individuals, different faculty members to find out kind of where the landmines were, I would say, and to find out what I needed to do. So for me, it was really jumping in and learning as quickly as I could. Again, I was hired for my leadership and the expectation was, hey, she's going to make some transformative change, right? So I knew I had that burden on me and I did. I was able to do that, but it took me about probably a good 4 months before I felt comfortable in looking at myself in the mirror. And before I'd be able to grasp this new civilian identity, right? So this mental transformation that I don't think we talk enough about that. And I don't care if you serve just 4 years, 2 years, 30 years, whatever. We get brainwashed, so to speak, when we come in the military. We go through training and we bleed the colors of our service, our country, and we put everything for ourselves. The service comes first, our country comes first. We take that oath and we mean it. And civilian world's a lot different. I mean, you can walk away from your job and go do something else, or you can quit. The military, you can't quit. You can't walk away. I don't care how bad it is. You just can't walk away. You can be court-martialed. So the rules are quite different. And I'm not sure the actual average civilian understands the commitment that we really make, right? And it's 24/7. And as a commander, for me, 24/7 was taking care of all my troops and their families as well. And then making sure they were taken care of while I was deployed. That kind of thing. So the mental transition was probably one of the most challenging for me, but I actually turned it and give it to you in a lighthearted way, talking about the clothes. But really, when I saw that image of myself, I didn't see me. That wasn't me. That was another civilian. Who is that civilian? So I think that says a lot right there.
Mm-hmm. And it's so incredibly layered because everybody on this call has multiple identities that we occupy at a given time. And sometimes one identity takes a step forward, the other ones take back, and it depends in the context that we're in. So our identities get authored or written in relationship with the context. So a military experience is a key defining context in which you are developing. So Lisa, I would like for you to share a little bit more about how you begin to redefine or write different parts of your identity after leaving the uniform.
Yeah, well, I mentioned I was hired specifically for my leadership, and I was told that. So they unknowingly gave me all the leverage. So in the negotiations for salary, all that kind of stuff, I relied on family and friends who were working in the civilian world who gave me great advice. So I had leverage that I could use early on in the negotiation. So that's a great thing. So I had a starting point was really good for me. But then I realized how much of a burden that is also, because I had a blank piece of paper, a newly created position. We want your leadership, do something transformative. See ya, and then you got to figure it out, right? And some people were not as welcoming as others. So it was interesting. So I realized that I needed to, again, and I say this all the time, competency is the way to move forward. And I did that in the military. I proved myself every location I was at, every role I had. So I didn't give anybody a reason to not promote me or not select me. You could say I was a Latina, you could say all kinds of stuff about me, I was a woman, but you could never say that I wasn't competent, right? So in higher ed, I took the same approach. I took basically my leadership skill set that I honed over years in the military, and I just adapted them to the new environment I was in. So again, using competency as the main tool, I became very competent. I listened to people. I found allies and champions in what I was trying to do, and people would help me, right? And then I realized I needed to get an early win. I needed to do something initially so that people would say, oh, she cares. Because people were talking about me like crazy. Oh, she's military. She's not going to care about diversity. She's not going to care about LGBTQ. She's not going to care about all these other things, right? And that couldn't have been further from the truth, but that's their assumptions and stereotypes of someone who had been in the military, right? So I worked really hard, and I was able to create a couple of what I call early wins. And I actually had a faculty member come to me and do the whole finger pointing thing and say, you shouldn't have been hired for this role. It should have been one of our faculty members that have been here, that knows everything. What do you know? I don't care how many medals you have. I don't care if you've been in combat, and I just said, oh, I'm sorry you feel that way. I just ask you that you judge me on my actions. And 6 months later, that faculty member came back to me and apologized and said, you know what? You have proven through your actions that you mean what you say and you say what you do. And I want to help you in whatever initiatives that you move forward with. And she did. But I could have, taken the low road and been real upset, but I did not, because again, I was kind of a foreign entity to this landscape of higher ed. So, but I selected 2 programs that I could get with faculty and students that I could implement kind of early. And I got the people to kind of surround it and know that I really meant what I said, that I really cared about the students. And then they supported me. So I would say competency is the number one thing, and my leadership skill set that I was able to take. And I'm talking communications, I'm talking organization, I'm talking mission focused. I led one faculty group with a grad student as well and staff to create a brand new President's Diversity Awards program, right? And the first few months of meeting, I just let them talk. And they love to talk, and because you've been in higher education, right, Esmeralda? So I had to say after about 2 months, okay, time out. Let's go back and remember what the task at hand is. What did the president task us with doing? And then I could do that. But if I had done that from the first minute I sat them down as the chair of the task force, they would have shot me down. So again, using leadership and being able to understand how to adapt it to whatever context you're in is what I was able to do.
That's a really powerful reminder, right? That redefining identity doesn't necessarily mean shed or delete other aspects of your identity. It's more understanding how you are going to deploy them or use them in a particular context. And that takes learning the context and the space. And it also takes deep introspection in yourself in being able to name what are those skills, where are you strong at, and what are they rooted in. So Denise, something that you brought up is seeing a model in your brother Henry, who joined the military before you. And I'm curious to hear more on what role did community, family, and mentorship play in your journey, both in the military, but in that transition period as well?
Yes. So yeah, and it's actually, it was very fortuitous, I would say too, because as I was going in the Air Force at the time, my brother was leaving the military. So he was already ahead, I guess you can say, in the transition aspect of it when I came out. So when I came out and I separated and I was transitioning out, he actually played a really huge role in regarding to connecting me with other organizations. One, like I mentioned, was ALPFA. And then another one, there's different, in Chicago, there's different events that have that organizations go to, like outreach events where there's like resource fairs, what have you. And he ended up going to one that I was not able to go to. And through that connection, when he came back that day, I remember he ran into an organization called Allen Force. And it was an organization it was fairly new. They was mostly focused on women veterans. And since it was so few, as mentioned before as well, my particular MOS, there was barely any female veterans that I was able to relate to or even be able to work aside with. It was very male dominant. So when I came back, I felt that same, feeling again, where it's just like, where are the women veterans? I know I'm not the only one, so it was very scarce at the time, at least for me, where I just didn't see it. Even going to the VA, going to the hospital, majority it's overrun by men. So when he came back from that particular resource fair, I remember he gave me that card and he's just like, hey, I came across this organization. It looks pretty cool for you. It's only for women veterans, so you should check it out. I ended up, it took me a few months. I didn't do it right away, to be honest. It took me a few months. But by the end of like 2012, I ended up going to one of their events. And ever since then, I've been going to their events for the past 12 years, anything that they do. They're an amazing, amazing organization. So something in regarding to that. So that is something I think he did really helpful for me as not like just as a family member, my brother, and just like, watching my back in that aspect, just like, hey, he brought something that wasn't even necessarily for him, but for me, and he noticed that it would be advantage for me to be involved in things like that. So that was really huge. That was really great. Another one in regarding to community, as I mentioned, when I volunteered for, like I said, straight 3 to 4 months at Jesse Brown VA in physical therapy, they seen my work ethic. They seen what I was doing and how I was helping out. I helped out quite a bit. As I mentioned, I took it very seriously as well. I was there for like the majority of the day, and they've seen my potential in so many different ways. And I mentioned to them at the time, I was like, hey, I'm looking into getting to go back to school for physical therapy, but I know I have to go back to school to finish my bachelor's first. So encouragingly, slowly, everybody from like the team, I would say in the OT and PT department, they were like, so have you applied to this school yet? Or do you have a start date? Or when do you plan on going back? If you need a reference, I'd be more, so it was very, very encouraging to have that support as well. And alongside the mentorship too, because it was just even though I was volunteering, I learned so much, and it was such a great learning experience. Learning from the staff, from the providers there, and then also there was a role while I was volunteering in PT and OT, where I would escort, like take veterans that were wheelchair bound back to the inpatient area. So if they're an inpatient, I would volunteer to take them from the wheelchair from inpatient to their therapy, and then from the therapy back to their room. And even then, it was a very long walk for me, but it was a great time to reconnect with a majority male veterans and talk to them and learn about their experiences. And it was just a really great overall learning experience for me. And I think that involvement with not only community, family, and mentorship, all of that just really shaped me in literally pushing me to move forward. And I would say because of them, I did end up going back to school. I applied, I got my bachelor's. And after that, I continued on with my journey, and I ended up going, eventually coming back a year after I graduated in 2015. I ended up getting a position, not as a physical therapist, because I ended up going all the way like that. But my degree was in community health and wellness. So it actually aligned with an internship opportunity with the VA in 2016 that I applied for. I ended up getting, and I worked there for 5 years. So that was, again, just little things that kind of happen, and having that community support was very impactful for me in general. So yeah.
That's very powerful, that now you are also part of that community support network, which I hear from y'all, like being connected to the people around you is key in that transition period. And and other people being in tune to what your needs and interests may be also puts onus on the surrounding community members to be more intentional with how we build relationships with veterans. Lisa, I want to go back to, you referenced your leadership style coming out in full force within the higher ed space. You also mentioned a couple of minutes back that you're on your third career. So I'm really curious to hear more about how the military experience has continued to shape your leadership styles, especially as you create new career pathways for yourself.
Yeah, I just have to say that I really honed those leadership skills. I mean, when you're leading in an adverse environment where people's lives are at stake, you really learn what's important, right? So those skills, it's just amazing to me how I've been able to transfer them into any environment. I actually wrote an article for Phi Kappa Phi Forum. You're probably familiar with Phi Kappa Phi. It's the world, the country's oldest honor society for all majors. So I was asked to provide a leadership article, and I wrote an article about it. It was called Deploying Leadership. And it was about taking those skill sets I had in the military and how I was able to adapt them to higher education. But now, how have I taken those skill sets and adapted them to become an entrepreneur and to become an author? And I've published 2 books now. I do a lot of keynote speaking, that kind of thing. So how I've been able to take that, and again, when you lead in the combat and military environment, it's different than leading in higher ed. Higher ed is more collegial. It's more democratic type of leadership. Entrepreneur leadership, I mean, you do everything. You know, you have to really learn, and you have to be okay with doing everything, you know, that kind of thing. But you're also, like I say, I work now on my third career. I have the hardest taskmaster myself, you know. So, I mean, I've had bosses that weren't as tough as I am on myself. So it's been interesting how I've been able to adapt that. But it's the same, and I'm talking emotional intelligence, I'm talking communication, verbally written, you know, being able to communicate in any environment. Again, I was always solid on my leadership. I never, no job intimidates me. You know, I've always been solid about that. But because the military is a great leadership laboratory every day. You know, they throw you in situations, they give you a lot of great training and education as well. But I mean, you sink or swim on your own merit, right? So I really felt like I came out of it with this leadership. So how am I going to use it? So my company, I mean, my tagline is leadership, transformational change through leadership. And that is transformational change for an organization, for an individual. And I think I'm living proof about how things I've been able to transform organizations. You know, again, I have a department I founded at the University of Texas in San Antonio. I'm the founder of the Veteran and Military Affairs Department, the UTSA Top Scholar Program, a couple other programs that I was able to found. So I'm a creative. I like to create. I'm innovative, and higher ed gave me free reign to do that, which was an outstanding fit for me. But now, as an entrepreneur, my hardest task is reining myself back in, because I have so many ideas in my head. You know, I have a book I'm starting to work early next year. It's about veterans who are entrepreneurs. And I've already got 8 people who are interested to participate with me. I'm going to tell other stories, veteran stories, right? And I'm really happy to tell veterans who are underserved, underrepresented, tell their stories. Because I think that's important. If they become entrepreneurs, I think that's important. And I think there's a correlation between serving in the military and being innovative. I mean, I saw the best level of innovation in combat when we couldn't get certain materials, supplies, in that really adverse environment. I saw my troops come up with outstanding workarounds. You know what I mean? And these are life and death workarounds. So for me, I mean, being innovative is part of the fun for me. I'm creative. Like I said, I have to kind of watch myself, because I have too many ideas and I want to implement all these things. I can't do that. So I have to stay in my lane, stay focused, and do what I do. And I do a lot of support for veteran groups. I do a lot of support to help others with military sexual trauma. I am a sexual assault survivor, and I've written about all that, you know, so I can help people. I do a lot of writing to heal workshops for different organizations and for the VA. I freely admit I have PTSD, and I was one who never spoke about it combat related and sexual trauma related. I never, ever talked about it till 10 years after I got out of the service, which if you do the math, that's just barely 4 years ago. But ever since then, for me, the writing, using the arts to help heal is what I've been able to do. So, but it's, you go back to those foundational leadership skills. You really do. And just learning how to adapt them. And I think we'll get into a little bit later, and I can tell you kind of my tips that I have for doing that.
Yeah, we'll circle in on that in a couple of minutes. And what I also heard from there is that leadership is more nuanced than just telling someone what to do and what the plan is. What I hear in your final reflections in regards to your writing is that leadership also takes a level of vulnerability and self-reflection and introspection in order to have a positive impact outside of you. So thank you so much for sharing your stories and sharing your vulnerability through your writing with us today. Denise, your work has focused on, or your support has also put a particular spotlight on women leaders or women veterans, my apologies. So I would like to hear from you, what advice would you give women veterans specifically as they embrace their new identities and their journeys outside of the military?
Yes, sure. Wow. Yeah. So in the beginning, as I mentioned, one advice I would definitely wish I had gotten as going out was, aside from needing to decompress, was taking a moment to reflect. And that was my whole body, mind, body, physically, emotionally, spiritually, was telling me, it's just like, what, stop what you're doing. Don't do anything for like, who knows how long, a week or what have you. However, if I just had taken time and like just reflect on like, what do I really want to do next? What brings joy to my life? What is fulfilling for me? What is something that I've never done? Or what do I want to pursue? So little by little, as I took that time during that, decompression period, and I was able to realize, I was like, hey, you know what? I might want to go into physical therapy. So let's try this out. Let me try volunteering. I love dancing. Let me see if there's a group I can go in or take a class, which I ended up doing, like taking a class, learning a new dance that I've never done before. All of those little steps that I end up doing just encourage me not only just to move forward, but help me build my network as well. Any hobby or interest that one would want to explore, or just, kind of take a plunge and like, hey, this is something I don't know anything about, but let me sign up for a class and like learn about it. If I like it, great. If I don't, at least I tried it once. Also outline a clear path or a plan of what you would want to transition to. So at that moment, when I wanted to be a physical therapist, I'm like, all right, well, let me see what this is. I volunteered. I was in the environment in the hospital setting. I went back to school, got my bachelor's. Actually, before going into the VA, I got a job while I was going to school in an outpatient rehabilitation office. So they did both PT and OT. So I got to see the outside setting, outside of the government, and how they did their work in that setting. And to be honest, that is actually where I was like, I don't think I really want to pursue this career anymore, which was fine. At least I gave myself those opportunities to be like in that environment, embrace it, work in it in certain different factors. That is also why I'm a really huge advocate for volunteering. I'm like, volunteer, take a chance to know and learn more about yourself, and as women veterans specifically, as I mentioned, I was thankfully guided to an organization that concentrated on just serving women veterans. And now they had expanded to any woman affiliated with the military. So it could have been the spouse, it could be the daughter, the aunt, the niece, what have you. They're open to all of them in this particular organization, in their group, and being able to, connect with other women veterans. And I've seen that, as I mentioned, for the past 12 years, it has grown immensely, that group. So finding organizations, and it could be veteran related, it could be not, it just really depends. As a woman veteran, as a woman in general too, with us on the call, we have so many titles, we have so many roles. When you take yourself slightly back, and not necessarily, you can decompartmentalize, but not necessarily if you don't feel like you need to. I could be a mother, I could be the daughter, I can be the sister or a caregiver for somebody. It's just like, all right, but make time for yourself, schedule yourself in. I think that is something huge. And then when you schedule yourself in and making yourself a priority, at least, certain times a week or what have you, find out what you love and connect with that. If there's people that love art, like I mentioned, I went to like some dance groups and I learned to connect within the dancing community, which is completely different from the veteran community. But I loved it and it was okay. And I had a chance to perform, which I've never thought I would do in my life. And I got to do it multiple times and I loved it. There's other times where I would just meet up with a group of friends, like even from before the military or from after the military, like meeting up to just watch games, whether it be like football, basketball, or what have you. And again, it was something aside from the veteran community that was an interest of mine. So for women veterans specifically, we are out there. Come find us. Look at your network, look at your different organizations, and see. Come out to certain events. At least here in Chicago, there have grown with different events specifically tailored to women veterans, which I loved and I've seen within the past couple of years, having it grown. They have a certain stand down for women veterans specifically, as before. Even though the stand down was open to both male and female, the majority of the time you would see only males go there. So they've made it to cater people that might, possibly, especially women veterans that have like either MST or PTSD. You don't want to mess or do anything or deal with anything with the male veterans. And it's just like, what, sometimes I just need my own space. And that is okay. I believe we fought for that right as well, too. And that is completely fine. And so look for that. I think, especially as being an outreach person, it's a hand in hand. I give out my hand to have somebody else give out their hand to receive. It's a give and take where it's just like we can only go certain far away to then be able to reciprocate in that aspect of so go out, search, find. The internet literally can take you anywhere. And don't be afraid to talk, like speak up even to your provider. One of the biggest things I remember, my first connection with the VA, actually for me, thankfully, was a very smooth connection. The first time I ever went for my appointment here at the Chicago VA, I came across the nurse that would, take your blood pressure, everything before you actually see your provider. That nurse, I remember, she told me, it's like, hey, did you happen to know that right across the street at UIC, they're having like a welcome home summit for veterans? So after your appointment, you should go. I ended up doing that. And in that summit, there was just a line of different organizations that I've learned from. It was a bombardment of information. However, it was an opportunity to know other organizations that are out there that were helping for the veteran community. And I think at times it's just like going out of your comfort zone as well, and finding it and making that opportunity. It's just like, hey, get out of your comfort zone, see what's out there for you. And you might find something that you love and find that and build that connection and that network. And I've been connected with so many women veterans throughout the years. And I'm still connected with them and I still keep meeting new ones. So, and it's just it's a really great supportive community. So I encourage people to go out and engage in those network opportunities when you have that chance.
And what I hear there to organizations like ALPFA or other community organizations is that the need is there, the interest is there, the community wants to engage. It is our responsibility to be responsive to that and create intentional spaces for folks. Lisa, I want to circle back to your tips and tricks on building that confidence, on advocating for themselves, either in the community and in the workplace. And then I'm going to throw in an extra layer in there, if that's all right. If you have any resources that you think would be helpful for folks that are transitioning out of the military that they could go to.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate all the comments that have been said so far. Denise, some of the things you said is exactly right. I mean, we share more experiences than we don't. even though we think we're the only ones, right? One thing I want to say is those like 4 weeks I had before I started higher education, after I left the military, I actually learned what I didn't want to do. And Denise, you mentioned that. That is really important. I created a resume for a job that I thought I wanted to do, one that I was really qualified for. I took the time to create this, tailor it specifically to this particular role. Got a call back for an interview, and then I turned it down because I don't want to do that. I learned through the process that I don't want to do that. It was too similar to what I did in the military, and I was looking for a completely different experience. So I learned what I didn't want to do, right? Another thing is a lot of us as vets are afraid to ask what we really need. I am, as a disabled veteran, like Denise, the military blessed me with chronic pain as well, with spine issues. And that's kind of why I'm standing up right here today instead of sitting down, because I work standing up because of the spine problems that I have. So I asked the provost for an accommodation. And they bought me a rolling podium so that I could use in the office and then take it to different places if I was presenting, and so I could stand instead of sit all the time. They also got me an ergonomic chair that was more, and they had their office, a specialty office, come in and do a whole ergonomic of my workspace evaluation. So, but this is something that a lot of us don't ask for. It's like, oh, we're not that disabled. Oh, they're worse than we are. They need it more. We're not going to bother that office. This is something that you're entitled to. And by law, they have to support you. So I think it's real important that we also ask for what we need. And we vets are very hard to do that because we don't like asking for anything. You know what I mean? So, but that's something that we need to learn to do. So I would say that my tips, or what do you call it? I call them Lisa's 5 L's, and it's lean, learn, leverage, lead, and liberate. And let me just kind of talk about it real quick. The first part was lean into interests and passions. And Denise, you beautifully stated that already, how important it is to do that. You will find stuff that maybe you had no idea that you're passionate about. If you don't try something new, you'll never know. I've done so many different things since I've left the military. If I didn't write that first poem, I wouldn't have written Latino Warrior. And I didn't write my first poem until 2021. And the first 2 poems I wrote, one was about military sexual trauma and one was about PTSD, a flashback that I had myself. So, and those 2 poems were shown at the Military Women's Memorial on display at a national exhibit. So, but again, I've never written a poem, and I don't write poems that are very technically, I guess, poems. I tell stories. I use narrative and prose to tell stories, right? So I think that's important. If I had not leaned into what I was interested in, I was leaning into passion. I wanted to make a difference on the MST landscape, the battlefield. And that's what I did with my first book. That's what that first book's about. 14 stories about military sexual trauma, the entire continuum of harm, from harassment to actually assault to rape. And learn. I'm a lifelong learner. I will never be the smartest person in the room because I still have something to learn. And I know that. And I love to read. Of course, I'm a writer, so most writers do, but I read multiple books at one time. And I think you can never know everything. And the day you give up on being a lifelong learner is, I think, the day that you'll never keep moving forward, right? So that's just my personal opinion. Leverage networks. You talked about that, Denise. That's so important. Leveraging networks. I didn't realize how vast my network was until I started tapping in it for different things with my passion, right? So I think it's networks means mentors and sponsors as well. I think that's important. And we all should know the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. And if we don't, then you're way behind the power curve, right? Lead. I lead with a servant's heart. I put other people first. So much so that my psychologist friends tell me that I practice avoidance because I care so much about other people and I want to help them more that I don't work on me, right? Well, I worked on me, and Latino Warrior is evidence of that. It's an autobiography told with a lot of joy, pain, heartache, trauma. But it's important for me to finally face that, right? So I always put people first. Liberate the authentic you. I think for you to be the best that you can be where you're at, you need to be you. And I downplayed me in the military. I downplayed my femininity. I downplayed my Latina-ness, because I wanted to be so like the white fighter pilots in charge, right? So I have learned that I bring so much more when I bring my full self to the workplace. Problem solving, creative, innovation, creativity, all that. So if we can authenticate, I mean, we can liberate the authentic individual that we are, how much more can we bring to the workspace? Especially because we won't be using that energy to guard us anymore. Because I use that energy for years to guard and protect myself, right? So I think those are 5 things that I've come up with, and I do different leadership presentations that talks about those in different ways. But for this, and when you ask the question about what do I recommend that maybe someone could read, I'm going to recommend that you read my stuff. I mean, I've written articles about transition. I'm in a book chapter about my transition. I've also written an article about transition tips, and I'll be happy to share with those who are interested. If they just let me know. I think they're putting my website URL there on the screen. I'll be happy to share my leadership philosophy, my transition tips, because I changed jobs. I think I'm on my 27th job now after all these years in the military. I mean, in the military, I had I think 19 jobs in the military, moved 17 times, physical moves. So I know a little bit about transition and how to adjust to a new boss, how to manage your boss, that kind of thing. So I'd be happy to talk with others about this particular issue, because I think leadership, I can't say it enough. It is everything. Competency is what it is. And that's how we can assert ourselves in the workplace.
Thank you so much. Yes, y'all are seeing the website scroll at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to reach out. And Lisa, I'm a former teacher. I love a framework. So could you just please repeat, what are those 5 L's again, to really make sure that folks internalize them? Oh, you're muted.
There we go. You're right. Thank you. Yeah, I love frameworks and models and that kind of thing. It's easy to remember too. Lean into interests and passions. Learn. Be a lifelong learner. Leverage your networks, your mentors, your sponsors. So leverage, lead with a servant's heart. Put others first. Liberate the authentic you.
Thank you so much. All right, so we have about 2 minutes left. So I'm going to throw a bit of a challenge to y'all. I know our last question is, what advice would you give to veterans that are struggling to balance their military identity with personal aspirations? That's along the lens of where we've been thinking. So if you could give me one sentence, one piece of advice that you want people to walk away from this call with, what would that be? And I let y'all decide who wants to answer that first.
I can go ahead. It's that the challenge is to have it all in one sentence. But I think one that really sticks out is surround yourself with support. Support from your family, support from the community, with civilian peers, with the mentorships, with the sponsorships, as I was mentioned before, successfully being able to balance their identities and experience and value the guidance and get inspired. All of that will help you grow in general and move forward wherever you need to be. So surrounding yourself with a good group of support. Ask. I know we're afraid of asking or saying that we need help for something. No, ask, surround, get that support that you need, because it's going to be vital in helping you grow overall in the future.
Leverage, I hear coming in. Leverage your support networks. Lisa.
That's right. Yeah, I think one thing that's so important is to know yourself. I think too many of us don't really know ourselves properly and are not being honest with ourselves. I'm talking about know your strengths and weaknesses. Take every self-assessment test there is, Myers-Briggs, True Colors, the DISC, everything that's out there. Take it and learn who you are, how you interact with people, and then you can surround yourself with people to help mitigate your weaknesses and amplify your strengths.
Thank you so much. Well, this concludes the part of the panel. Again, I want to thank both of you for taking the time to speak with me and to have our community listening in. I would like to throw in my own piece of advice. I am coming from an employer end and organizational end. It's a huge ask for veterans to be reminding themselves, go and ask for help, go do X, Y, Z. People should have that advocacy. Employers can also be advocates for their employees and be ready to offer those supports and not just be waiting around to ask. We have a lot of resources, a lot of learning that we can do already from what is shared. And it's up to us to also be proactive. So that's certainly a lesson that I'm taking away. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and have a good day.